name is Leonard Weiss, and today we'll be going down the rabbit hole of Hegel's philosophy of market economy. Yes, that makes for another Hegel episode, but it comes with a surprise. This time, I will not guide the exploration myself, but instead borrow the microphone to my friend Thimo Heisenberg. Thimo teaches philosophy at Bryn Mawr College near the city of Philadelphia in the United States. He has wide-ranging interests in German idealism, but especially in the social and economic theory of this period. That makes him exactly the right person to introduce us to Hegel and his views about market economy. So thank you, Thimo, for creating a very instructive guide to an unsuspected facet of Hegel's thought.
Well, thank you for having me on the podcast and thank you for listening. Today, we will talk about why Hegel, even though he is usually thought of as a friend of a strong state, comes to embrace the market economy and the competition it engenders. While exploring Hegel's position, we will review some of the standard arguments in favor of this economic form and consider how and to what extent Hegel goes beyond those arguments. In particular, we will see that, somewhat surprisingly, and unlike many other defenders of the market, Hegel sees a central value of the market economy precisely in what kind of person participating in a market economy teaches us to be. So let's go down the rabbit hole. Hegel is a proponent and defender of the market economy, that is, of a system of exchange and production driven by self-interest and regulated to a significant degree by the forces of supply and demand. Indeed, as the 1821 Philosophy of Right, Hegel's central work in social and political philosophy, tells us, Hegel holds the view that the market economy is superior to other forms of economic organization and one of the elements that overall add to the rationality and value of the modern social world. Now, the fact that Hegel embraces the market economy should be to some extent surprising to us. After all, those who have encountered Hegel will probably have heard that he is usually thought of as a proponent of a strong state, a state that plays a significant role in regimenting social life and the life of its citizens. And indeed, Hegel in his text is very critical of those who want to reduce the role of the state to that of a mere guarantor of external security, instead arguing that public institutions have an important role to play in educating citizens and guiding them, in some ways, towards a good life. From this standpoint, we would expect Hegel to defend something like a planned economy, not a market economy. And Hegel would have had historical precedent exactly for such an idea. Plato's Republic, which Hegel frequently cites in the Philosophy of Right, had arguably made the case precisely for such a planned economic order, as did Hegel's immediate predecessor, Johann Gottlieb Fichte, who had argued for a planned economy in his 1800 closed commercial state. But Hegel goes in a significantly different direction. There are three main reasons for this. The first reason is one that Hegel shares with many past and present defenders of the market, including with Adam Smith, who Hegel avidly read and frequently cites in his texts. The idea is just that the market economy is good because, well, it gives individuals a sphere to exercise their individual freedom, that is, their freedom to pursue their own desires. In his discussion of the market economy, Hegel calls the market, for this very reason, a liberation, Befreiung, for the individual, a place where individual desires can come to be expressed in a way in which that would not have been possible in previous economic forms, such as a feudal economy where our economic role is determined not by our desires, but rather by the social station into which we are born. The second reason is one which Hegel also shares, broadly speaking, with Adam Smith and with many contemporary defenders of the market, among which it still has great currency. No pun intended. The idea here is that the market is the form of economic organization that works most efficiently and is therefore most advantageous for the material well-being of society overall, but perhaps also for the material well-being of its individual members, although that latter point is, of course, more controversial. The idea is simple. The market, or so its defenders, including Hegel, like to argue, tends to do a better job than human agents do in coordinating the highly complex and extremely intricate division of labor that the modern economy requires. Compared to a planned economy, society as a whole will therefore be materially better off when its exchange and production does not depend on the fallible decisions of limited human planners, but rather on the emerging laws of supply and demand. So, as for many defenders of the market still today, Hegel's endorsement of the market economy has to do with freedom and the material well-being of society. But is that all? Is Hegel simply a standard defender of the market? The answer here is no. There is a third line of argument in the text, an argument that is more original and unique to Hegel, but it is also much more surprising from a contemporary point of view. In the midst of Hegel's discussion of the market economy, in paragraph 187 of the Philosophy of Right, the reader finds an intriguing passage in which Hegel calls the market sphere the, and I quote, sphere of education, end of quote, and clearly proposes that this is somehow a feature that counts in favor specifically of the market economy. This passage just vaguely suggests that the value of the market economy for Hegel does not simply hinge on how it lets us express ourselves or how wealthy it makes society, but on what kind of people it educates us to be. Traditionally, though, for commentators, this Hegelian remark here has somehow seemed inconsistent, which is presumably why it has generally not received a lot of attention when commentators reconstruct Hegel's argument for the market economy. That's because commentators tend to think that the kind of education that Hegel here has in mind is the education that comes from generic productive activity. If I bake bread, I learn how to cook. If I butcher meat, I get better with a knife, and so on and so forth. But if that was Hegel's point, it would indeed be unintelligible how that could be an argument for the market economy specifically. After all, productive economic activity in general is not a unique characteristic of the market economy. Even in a planned economy, people bake bread and butcher meat and learn general and specialized skills in the process. But we don't have to attribute such an inconsistent view to Hegel. Instead, we should take Hegel at his word and assume that he means to say that there is an educational benefit not just in generic economic activity, but in the formal practice of participating in a market system, that is, in a system of production and exchange that is governed to a significant degree by the forces of supply and demand. But what could that educational benefit be? This is initially not so obvious, since we usually do not think of participating in specifically a market exchange as a valuable educational experience. So, what could Hegel's argument here be? Hegel's view is complex, but let me just hone in on 2 points. First point, Hegel thinks that it is through participating in the market economy that individuals learn the full extent of what they, as individuals, desire for themselves. They learn to see themselves as desirous individual subjects. The thought here must be this. Within the family, children live in an immediate unity with their parents, in which most of their activities are predetermined for them, to a greater or lesser extent, by others. This changes once social members, as young adults, are forced to step into the market sphere in order to find some work for themselves on the labor market. Here, all the guidance of their parents and of familial tradition has receded into the background, and social members are forced to ask themselves what it is that they want. What is it that I want? What do I really desire? Questions that might have not even occurred to them, or at least not with the same intensity and existential severity while they were still living within the bounds of the family. From this standpoint, it is then not surprising that in one of his lectures on the philosophy of right, Hegel equates entering the market with a, and I quote, going into myself, in mich gehen, as a subject, end of quote. Since it is here that, according to him, I discover what it is that I, as opposed to all other people, really want, thereby, and this is once again a quote from the lectures, elevating my own, quote, naturalness, Natürlichkeit, to subjective knowing and willing, end of quote. Second point. Hegel argues that participation in the market economy does not only lead its participants to see themselves as desirous selves, but also that it helps them to become more conscious of and more comfortable with the fact that other people have very different desires. That what I want is not necessarily what you want or what everyone else wants. Hegel expresses this by saying that the market teaches people, quote, tact, schliff, end of quote, which Hegel takes to be this fundamental skill to recognize and to deal with desiderative difference between me and others. Tactful people do not, and I quote, flaunt their particularity, end of quote, but instead open themselves up for considering other people's preferences, which is not at all a peripheral social skill, but one that we all urgently need to effectively cooperate with one another. But how and why, in Hegel's view, does the market sphere give us tact in the sense just described? Hegel's thought here is this. Within the family, individual social members, at least for the most part, experience only a very moderate and constrained amount of diversity in terms of individual desires and preferences. Family members, after all, at least as Hegel conceives of it, share a common life world, common habits, and even a common biological or natural disposition, which in turn gives them a fairly, albeit perhaps not fully, homogeneous set of desires and preferences. Hence, by growing up within the immediate unity of the family, individuals will not be able to really develop tact, as described above, because within the bounds of the family, it is actually a safe assumption that the others that I encounter will not radically disagree with me about what is desirable or not. But this once again changes when an individual steps into the market sphere. Since it is constitutive of the market that I am compelled to produce for and exchange goods with whoever makes me the best offer, the market will inevitably push me to carefully consider the preferences of other people who, unlike the members of my family, do not share my life world, my habits, and my biological dispositions, and who will hence sometimes have radically different preferences from my own. And it is here that social members learn tact. Indeed, we can see that Hegel expresses exactly this line of thought in an intriguing pun. On the market, he argues, individuals, just like a metal coin, pass from one set of hands to another set of hands, thereby having their surface rubbed off a little bit every time, in German literally abschleifen, such that overall Schliff, which is German for tact, emerges. So, participating in the market for Hegel teaches us something like a valuable form of individuality, an individuality that is aware of its own desires, but it also recognizes and is comfortable with the fact that those desires are not necessarily shared by others. It is clear that this form of individuality is particularly valuable in a modern society that features a diversity of members, which is exactly how Hegel always imagined modern societies. After all, if we cannot locate our own desires and proficiently deal with desiderative difference, it will be much harder for us to effectively navigate a social topography of people and situations different from the ones that we have grown up in. And this is, Hegel thinks, a central reason why we need the market. Now, Today we have focused on Hegel's embrace of the market economy and the complex reasons for this embrace. None of this is to say, of course, that Hegel doesn't also recognize some grave problems with this economic form. Indeed, his text features both a discussion of the problem of poverty, that is, of economic disenfranchisement and of the resulting social deprivation, and a discussion of what one might call the problem of affluence, that is, a discussion of the detrimental effects that great wealth can have on society and maybe even on the individuals who have it. So Hegel is aware of the economic inequality that a market economy tends to generate, and he's quite conscious and indeed discusses the often horrible effects that this can have on life in society. But how can Hegel reconcile his recognition of these problems with the embrace of the market economy, such as we have reconstructed it here? This is indeed a deep question of Hegel's social philosophy. Solving it would involve considering Hegel's view on whether there is a way of saving the market and us from its problems while also saving the market itself and not giving up on it entirely. But how exactly Hegel wants to square this circle would be a topic for another episode of this podcast. As always, with these kinds of short philosophical explorations, at the bottom of one rabbit hole is just another rabbit hole. For now, I want to close by naming a few resources if you want to keep digging further down. The script for today's episode was based on my article Hegel on the Value of the Market Economy, published in the European Journal of Philosophy, as well as on my article Hegel and the Problem of Affluence, forthcoming in the Journal of the American Philosophical Association. For a more general exploration of Hegel's social philosophy, I recommend Michael Hardimann's book on this very subject, Alan Wood's classic Hegel's Ethical Thought, and Frederick Neuhaus's Foundations of Hegel's Social Theory, Actualizing Freedom.
This was The Rabbit Hole of Hegel's Philosophy of Market Economy. And today's episode was authored and spoken by Thimo Heisenberg. If you found this interesting, feel free to leave a comment or question in the comment section below. Right now, a fourth episode is in the making. I won't spoil it, but I can tell you this much. It won't be on Hegel, and it will again be a collaborative project. So if you like, follow this channel and watch out for new rabbit holes.